Hey everyone, welcome to the Liam McCullum Show. This is going to be my first solo commentary episode. It's going to be interesting trying to get used to talking to someone behind the camera, this hypothetical person. You know, talking to a mic is a different thing. It's difficult in itself when there's someone, you know, that you're talking to over Skype and you're also recording it, but this will be interesting. I want to do it a lot more. Also, I've been looking at my analytics for the podcast for all of the interviews, and it says that you guys are out there. It says that I do have an audience, if you can call it one. And if you guys came to the show through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or whatever, please just reach out. I think it might be interesting just to communicate with you guys, to interact. And if you just found me through an algorithm on YouTube or Apple Podcasts or whatever. The platforms I use are Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, Stitcher. I believe that's it. But if you didn't come to the show through social media, if you aren't a friend or family, just maybe follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I believe they're all under Liam McCullum except Instagram, which is Michael Liam McCullum. So just follow me there and reach out. If you do follow me on Facebook, you will have seen that I posted a little bit about 1984, George Orwell's 1984, and an economist, Frédéric Bastiat. I started a new job, and my Saturdays are pretty busy, so they're 12-hour days, and I basically just challenge myself, you know, my ADHD self. I get distracted very easily, so I'm jumping podcast to podcast. And I was like, hey, let's just listen to one audiobook. And George Orwell's 1984 lasted 11 hours, and I listened to the entire thing on my 12-hour day. And it really kind of stuck with me, so I actually made a Facebook post about it, and it just reminded me, there's a specific part within the book where basically this character named Goldstein, he's basically the resistance, the brotherhood. He is the resistance to Big Brother in the English Socialists of 1984. And there is a question of whether or not the organization actually exists, if, you know, they're just an outgrowth of the English Socialists who were born just to control dissidents within the party. But basically, Goldstein, he's the leader of the resistance, and he releases this book. It's basically a treatise on English socialism and how it was formed, and basically just trying to expose the philosophy that undergirds it. So the main character, Winston, reads this book. He finds a little sect of the resistance, and he's given the book by Goldstein. And there's a chapter within the book, I think it's the third chapter of Goldstein's book, so a book within a book, both fictional, and the third chapter is called War is Peace, which is the English Socialist motto for war. And basically Goldstein breaks it down, and I just want to read some quotes here because it really reminded me of this pervasive yet destructive idea that war is good for the economy. And I made a post about it on Facebook, so you probably already seen it if you follow me there. Here are some quotes from that chapter. The first is, "The essential act of war is destruction, not necessarily of human lives, but of the product of human labor." And then he goes on, "War is a way of destroying materials which might otherwise be used to make the masses too comfortable and hence, in the long run, too intelligent. A floating fortress, or like a battleship or something like that, for example, has locked up in it the labor that would build several hundred cargo ships for trade." So basically, all these battleships that are sent off to foreign countries to be destroyed and then to be rebuilt and destroyed and rebuilt and destroyed. Instead, they could have been used to build cargo ships for trade, which would increase the wealth of others. As we know, the way that wealth increases is that I trade something that I value more. The way that wealth increases is basically that we both value what we have from each other more than what we're willing to give up. So if I trade with you, I'm going to give something up for something that I value more. And that's how you increase wealth in society. This basically doesn't allow it to happen. War does not allow wealth to increase. So the next quote is, "The problem was how to keep the wheels of industry turning without increasing the wealth of the world. In principle, it would be simple to waste the surplus labor of the world by building temples and pyramids, by digging holes and filling them up again, and then I put in brackets work programs, because that's essentially what they were and what they are. Research the New Deal and the destructive policies there. I might cover them in later episodes. But then he goes on, but this would provide only the economic and not the emotional basis for a hierarchical society. So he's saying, in principle, it would be just as simple to continue to buy products and burn them up, but it doesn't create a psychological environment for people to be subjected to the state. It only creates the economic environment for it. So, and I just find it interesting because there were other parts within the book where he was breaking down hierarchy, and his idea of hierarchy was pretty interesting. I don't remember exactly how he broke it down, but my conclusions from it were basically that when you collectivize society, when you mandate from top down, the hierarchy is actually much bigger and centralized, so there's less people who benefit from the hierarchy. There's only a few people at the top who are actually benefiting from that hierarchy. Whereas if you decentralize society, there are many hierarchies within society, and there are many people who benefit from those hierarchies. So you might have, private businesses, worker co-ops, you might have nonprofits or whatever, but basically there's many of them rather than one centralized government. So a decentralized society is better and more profitable than, at least for society, whereas a centralized government is more profitable for the people that sit up on top. I just found that entire idea interesting, especially since I believe George Orwell was a democratic socialist, but I have no idea how the terms have evolved over time. So another quote is, "States are not fighting against each other at all. The war is waged by each ruling group against its own subjects, and the object of war is not to make or prevent conquest of territories, but to keep the structure of society intact." So the book basically explains that there are 3 super states within the world. I believe Russia, United States, and Europe. After the Cold War, they centralized, they became super states, and now they're all fighting over the same territories in Africa. And he explains that they all have the capacity, they all have the strength to keep their own, and they're never going to beat each other. But what ends up happening is, in this infinite battle for these territories that will never actually be resolved, the people within those countries are actually enslaved into this system where, as Orwell says, the wheels of industry are turning, but no wealth is created. And then in that Facebook post, I basically just went on to explain that, there was an economist in the 1800s named Frédéric Bastiat, and I have his book right here, and I want to read a little bit out of it. He coined the broken window fallacy, and I just want to read this right here. So basically, he posits that there's this guy named John Q. Citizen, and he is a shopkeeper. His son comes along and throws a rock through the window. And he explains a scene where, some economists, some Keynesians come along and they say, hey, this is actually good for the economy because now there's money circulating. John Q. Citizen has to spend money, so therefore the economy is doing well. The glazer benefits from the kid throwing the rock through the window. So Frédéric Bastiat, he goes on. Suppose it costs 6 francs to repair the damage, and you say that the accident brings 6 francs to the glazer's trade, that it encourages that trade to the amount of 6 francs. I grant it. I have not a word to say against it. You reason justly. The glazer comes, performs his task, receives his 6 francs, rubs his hands, and in his heart blesses the careless child. All this is that which is seen. So he comes up with this concept, and the essay I'm reading from is called That Which Is Seen and That Which Is Not Seen. He comes up with this concept where basically, I think it was elaborated as the short run versus the long run in future books. You can read Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. He breaks down basically the same lesson in a more modernized version, where the short run is what we see, the long run is what we don't see. There are some effects from a certain policy that we don't necessarily see, but it hurts us. So he says that, yes, the glazer benefits, and that is what is seen in the present. But if, on the other hand, you come to the conclusion, as is too often the case, that it is a good thing to break windows, that it causes money to circulate, and that the encouragement of industry in general will be the result of it, you will oblige me to call out, "Stop there. Your theory is confined to that which is seen. It takes no account of that which is not seen. It is not seen that as our shopkeeper has spent 6 francs upon one thing, he cannot spend them upon another. It is not seen that if he had not had a window to replace, he would, perhaps, have replaced his old shoes or added another book to his library. In short, he would have employed his 6 francs in some way which this accident has prevented. Let us take a view of industry in general. As affected by this circumstance, the window being broken, the glazier's trade is encouraged to the amount of 6 francs. This is that which is seen. If the window had not been broken, the shoemaker's trade or some other would have been encouraged to the amount of 6 francs. This is that which is not seen. So you will hear from Keynesians, you will hear from teachers within like a middle school history class that World War II pulled us out of the economy. But what you don't see is that, or what's not explained is it was actually the demilitarization of society that actually caused the boom afterwards. So basically you were employing certain services towards something and then you removed it from it. And of course, if you enslave people and then you free them, you're unlocking more labor, you're freeing people to actually produce more freely. If you continue to destroy, if I continue to buy this book, for instance, if I continue to buy this book and set it afire and then continue to buy it, my wealth over time is going to decrease. And that's what's happening. In no way did World War II pull us out of the Great Depression. If you know anything about me, I've been stressing for the last year that the economy is not stable. Jerome Powell just admitted 2 days ago to CNBC that he will continue to pursue a policy of inflation, 2% inflation every year, which basically means that he will not tighten monetary policy. He will continue to keep interest rates artificially low, which will prop up certain areas of the market. So we know that a lot of what's going on is artificial. We know that there is too much demand and not enough supply of everything, especially since we just got out of we're still going through a pandemic. Unemployment is still really high. So this is the policy to keep a 2% inflation over time. They admit that, but as we know, they don't drop it equally among everyone. The way it works is that, they'll type more zeros into a balance sheet. That's how they effectively print money. They'll give it to Lockheed Martin, for instance. So on the topic of war, when Lockheed Martin goes over, they produce a ship or they produce a plane or whatever, and this plane is destroyed. It actually doesn't harm them because the government, which is a monopoly on violence, can just charge someone. They can put more zeros in their balance sheet. It actually benefits Lockheed Martin to have a plane destroyed because then they are paid through legislation or the Fed. So we actually see where this hierarchy that is centralized benefits a few, whereas if we had freed up that labor, if we had allowed people to produce planes, for instance, for the average citizen, for private society, we would have had more jobs within private society. We would have had more planes. We would have allowed more citizens. I think there's actually a part in George Orwell where he's like, it is not the benefit of the state to allow private citizens to own planes because then they're free. So instead what they do is they create these airplanes for military practice, and they just go over and destroy them. They keep the wheels of industry turning without actually increasing any wealth. So I just think that it's important to be cautious when you hear certain politicians or when you hear historians say that it is actually war that helps us out of recessions. So I am very worried about the economy, but I'm even more worried that historians and politicians will use this as a reason to go to war. So we already know Donald Trump tried pulling out of Afghanistan, and now the Democrats are pursuing a policy where you actually have to get approval from Congress to pull out of a war, even if it's not a war that was approved by Congress in the first place, which doesn't make any sense. We also know that the New York Times had to backtrack on a story where they basically accused that the current government knew that there were Russian bounties on American soldiers' heads. And that was right after Donald Trump announced that he would pull soldiers out of Afghanistan. So basically that whole story served as an incentive to make Donald Trump remain in Afghanistan, to put more pressure on the Russians. So there's always constant pressure to continue to go to war. There was also, I believe, a bill, I don't know exactly what it was for. I think it was the reauthorization of military force. It came up again. They were reviewing it, whether or not they would amend it or if they would scrap it. And I think it got renewed. And basically all of the Democrats who supposedly come from the anti-war party, all of them got money from Lockheed Martin. And as we know, the Federal Reserve, so Jerome Powell, who admitted that he would pursue 2% inflation, we know that basically the way that Lockheed Martin makes money is the Federal Reserve can go in and put more zeros in their bank account and on their balance sheet. And that's kind of what Orwell is talking about with these hierarchies, where if they're more collectivized, less people are actually benefiting, and it's more centralized. So yeah, I'm really worried about the economy, but just be aware, these politicians don't have your interests in mind. These Keynesians, I want to actually read you an article. If you think that I'm making it up, this is actually a very pervasive idea. So the Washington Post actually came out with an article that said, in the long run, wars make us safer and richer. And, he'll use these concepts that, like after World War II, we wouldn't have had nuclear energy or whatever if we didn't have this incentive to come up with new weapons. But he also mentions Thomas Hobbes in the case for the Leviathan government. But his entire article is basically like this post hoc fallacy, which says that, just because there was a war and there was a bunch of progress afterwards must mean that the reason there was progress was the war, when we can clearly see that it's actually the demilitarization that causes it. When you free up labor that is being wasted on destruction and on plunder, then of course you're going to have progress. And then we also have history of investments in manufacturing. So a lot of people will cite Japan or South Korea after World War II, and I believe the Korean War, as evidence that wars benefit society. But what they don't see is that we are also heavily investing in those countries after the war. They're being super demilitarized. So yeah, there's obviously heavily investment in industry afterwards. When we look at our heavy involvement in Japan after World War II and our heavy investment in certain industries, of course there's going to be heavy growth afterwards. And what's also not seen is that there was actually probably a lot of monetary inflation and QE going on as well. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know exactly what their policies were like afterwards, but we do know that they are having a currency crisis now, and with our really poor monetary policy, I'm sure that had quite a bit to do with it. And here I have some more data. So it was actually, some people say it's like the victor who actually benefits from a war, but America was spending 90% of its federal budget on its war effort after World War II, and we're spending 20% now. And then this article goes on to make the same exact point that I was. What do you think would have been better use of that money? Building things that go boom and then disappear after one use, or building something that lasts and can be used for many years? And what's actually shown is that people who stay out of the war benefit much more. So Argentina, which basically remained neutral but would fund people within the wars, they benefited a lot. Yeah, so basically this was a huge caffeine-induced rant. I wanted to do this though. I have a lot of anxiety towards speaking into a camera. I'm going to bring on a co-host eventually. It'll be my friend Quinn Donaldson. Super intelligent dude. We both kind of progressed in our thought process and our political philosophy the same exact way. I don't believe we disagree on much. And then I think it might also be interesting to do some more commentary, more book reviews like this. I know that this doesn't necessarily count. I didn't read the book, I listened to it. I beat myself up about that. Still put it in my Goodreads as book that I finished. Don't tell anybody. But yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please try to support the show in any way you can. Like it, share it. As I said before, I'm on Spotify, I'm on SoundCloud, I'm on YouTube, Stitcher, Parler, ThinkSpot, Apple Podcasts. Please support me. Please like the show. Please leave a review. And as I mentioned earlier, reach out to me on social media. This was my first video episode, so bear with me. And I hope you guys enjoyed the content. Please give me some feedback, and I'll see you later.